Where does your scepticism come from?
I used to be a very devout Christian when I was younger, but didn't have a Christian family and didn't have Christian friends. Particularly, I had one good Christian friend, but it came from a Bible reading class when I was young. It was a sort of unpleasant childhood indoctrination. But because I grew up without a Christian peer group, when I got to university, it was relatively easy for me to kind of sort of think my way out of it in a way, to sort of start to challenge it and not feel too much guilt. I mean, and I started to learn hypnosis at the time. That was the sort of the first stepping stone to what I'm doing now. And I had all these Christians terribly upset and offended that I was doing it because it sort of ushered in demons, as far as they, which to me I kind of thought, well, if you believe that God created us, surely the mind is the pinnacle of that creation. So why looking at the mind in any way would be seen as demonic and a bad thing? I didn't really understand, let alone, if you don't understand hypnosis, how can you say it ushers in demons? And I know I understand it better than they did. So that was a strange kind of, I realised there was just this fear issue with anything that was misunderstood. And the New Age industry at that time was really blossoming, and it was a real bête noire to the fairly rabid pastors that I had and saw at churches. But because at the same time I was getting into magic, and through magic realising how things like tarot cards and psychics really work, and that there's nothing mystical about it that could therefore be seen as dangerous, but it's just simply just sort of rubbish and charlatanism and psychology at work. I'd talk to psychics and I'd listen to their sort of circular belief, and I'd think, well, I am just doing exactly the same thing as a Christian. The only difference is it's easier to sort of laugh at them because it's a fringe belief, whereas my belief is so much more endorsed institutionally. It's more respectable. But I thought, well, I'm just being a hypocrite, so I started to read some theology texts and books about sort of how the Bible really kind of came together, and a kind of a mixture of books that I hope would at least challenge my easy, pat answers that I had as a young Christian. And I felt that if I could undo all the easy answers, if I just had a bunch of questions, that I might actually be able to build a much stronger, more defensible faith from it. And then that just sort of didn't happen. It just all seemed silly, and I realised there was no going back. And once you accept that the Bible isn't a historical account of things that have happened, then you're sort of left with no basis for it at all. From that, then, I wanted to defend my non-belief as strongly as I felt that I should have been able to defend it as a believer. On the back of that and off the back of the magic, a sort of an understanding how these supposedly paranormal industries work. So we have information on things like placebo effect and information like cold reading, and these things exist, and false memories and anecdotal, and all those things that are important. And taking that on board is just about being able to make better decisions. That's about being truly open-minded, ignoring them and putting them to one side in this sort of pursuit of easy answers and intuition as the be-all and end-all of truth. That's not being open-minded at all. I think that's very narrow-minded, and certainly to laugh at people that say that evidence is important, I think that's you know, it's hypocrisy of the worst kind to call them narrow-minded.
Derren, could you begin by telling me what cold reading is and how it's used?
From psychics to spiritualists to palm readers to graphologists to astrologists, the expert in question is either just simply deluded and naive, or they're using a skill called cold reading, which is a way of communicating information to somebody where it sounds like they know everything about you, and they can reveal facts seemingly about your life and describe your character in a way that you'd be amazed by. Whereas in fact it's a linguistic trick, or a set of linguistic tricks, where they're saying words and you're constantly supplying the meaning yourself, but it can be very convincing. And those tricks can give the impression that the person knows everything about your character, or might refer to facts and things from your life or from your past that they seemingly couldn't know.
The first psychic, a so-called psychic, a trickster, was trying to pretend to guess, I don't know, the name of the sitter's grandfather or something like that. What would be the kind of thing they might do?
Even guessing the name of a grandfather, if you back up, what tends to happen is that the psychic will, if it's with a group of people, throw out a name and say, I'm getting the name John or Albert, or some name that's sort of suitable for the age group they're working with. Now that name could refer to a person in the audience who's living, or it could refer to someone that's died, or it could be a friend of the, you know, it really could be anything. So it's up to somebody to pick up on it and turn it into what they want it to be. And of course if they say, yes, that was my husband, then the reader can go, yes, that's right, he's here, he's saying he still loves you. Barnum statements are part of the toolkit of the cold reading psychic, named after the showman P.T. Barnum, who famously said that he had something for everyone, and they are statements which apply to everyone, although they'll always sound very specific to the individual. You know, pretty much everybody's had some creative pursuit at some point that they've left behind them, and if I point that out to you, you know, it might sound very insightful, but really it could just apply to anybody. There's a terrific experiment that was done on this with students. I've filmed this myself. We did it with 3 different groups of people across the world, where you have everybody in the group is given a reading, a personality reading, and normally beforehand there's some nonsense about asking for their birth date or getting some objects off them. That, so there's some sort of process apparently involved, and they're given a reading, and it's a long reading. It's a very detailed personality reading, and they all get one individually. They're all asked to read it. And invariably, they will all say afterwards that it's very, very accurate, that it was not at all vague or ambiguous or what people might expect. And they'll give it 85, 90, 95% accuracy. I've seen this happen and people are amazed by it. And then you get them to swap with each other. And so perhaps you can identify someone else by their reading, and they realise they've all been given exactly the same thing, which was written months ago before I even met them. These are statements along the lines of, you're somebody who... You tend to keep people a little bit at bay, but when...
You're a caring person.
Yeah, you're a caring, you keep people a little bit at bay there. You tend to keep people at arm's length, but when you allow people into that inner sanctum of, when they become your close friends, if they betray you, then that really hurts. And you're not saying anything other than you're closer to people that you're close to. Then it means nothing, absolutely nothing.
Yes. And horoscopes are the same. I mean, they use the same principle.
Because those things have to apply to anybody, because there's no interaction going on. A horoscope or something given, when everyone's getting the same thing. There's no feedback, so you're simply relying on things that apply to anybody. What you can do when you're interacting with somebody is you can fork off from one way or another. Be careful I say that. You can go one way or the other depending on the response you get. So if I said to you, the spirits are telling me you've got quite a temper, you could answer yes or no to that. You might agree or disagree. Now, if you agree with it, it feels like a hit, and I can say yes, that's right. I can sense that you've got a real temper. ... If you say no, I can say, but what's great about you is that you've learnt to control it on the outside. It still feels like a hit. Linguistically, what they tend to do is they say. They put the word not into the question, so they'll say things like, one recent reading I was listening to was, she said, now you haven't been drinking a lot of water recently, have you? And by phrasing it in the negative, it allows a yes or no to be a hit. And the answer was no, and she said, well, you should do. The spirit's telling me you need to be drinking more than you are. You haven't been drinking much. And it sounded like a hit. Equally, if the person said yes, it would have seemed like, yes, they're telling me, either way. A common ruse also is to make statements that allow you to have both sides of the coin in one go. So, for example, if I said to you, you've got an extrovert side and an introvert side, that's not remotely convincing at all. That seems to be a given. But if you say to somebody, when you're at a party, you're very good at being able to hold court. You can entertain people. You're very good at being really the life and soul of the party. But what's interesting about you is that when you walk away from that, you'll often find yourself at home running back through conversations in your head and wondering, what did that person mean? Why did I say that? That was stupid. And when you're even at those parties, even though you like to think that you're somebody who can be, in charge and very charismatic, you'll often find yourself just stood there thinking, God, why am I here? It's like everyone is a million miles away, and you're aware that that is a facade that you put on. Now, whether or not that applies to you, the fact is, all I'm doing is saying that you've got an introvert and an extrovert side, which cancels itself out. It means nothing, and yet most people will find a way of sort of making that easily fit themselves.
Now, when you analyse these things like the Barnum effect and cold reading, you're doing it in a sort of rational way. I take it that the psychics and palm readers and astrologers and people who do it know perfectly well what they're doing, and therefore they are fakes. But are all of them fakes, or do some of them somehow manage to fool themselves as well?
The difference is you can see when cold reading is at work, when you know the tricks, when you know the same old things coming out about, you've got an old box of photographs at home with the tricks that they come out with, and the pushing for statements, making somebody make a statement hit, and if they don't, moving on to the next person. One I was listening to recently, you've been doing a lot of spirit telling me you've been doing a lot of sewing. And that woman was like, no. She said, well, is it somebody in the spirit plane who's been doing a lot of sewing? No, she couldn't make a hit. And so went to the next person, is it for you? You've been doing a lot of sewing? And the woman was, no. She said, well, there's a coat, you've got a coat at home with, there's a button that's loose or a hem that's loose. No, I mean, it wasn't working. And in the end, she said, well, have a look for that, my dear. They're telling me there's a, and it went from somebody, to nothing. So when you see that, that's clearly that person they know exactly what they're doing. They're desperately trying to get a hit. I've been to psychic training colleges and seen people that are very sincerely trying to learn. They've been told they believe that they're a bit psychic because, we all have a certain amount of intuition, and we all, if we misunderstand things like kind of coincidence and a phone ringing because we've been thinking of somebody earlier on that day and the phone rings and it's them, we might mistake that for being psychic if we don't really understand how those things can easily happen quite a lot of the time. So I think there are plenty of people who learn it genuinely and really think that, whether it's palm reading or tarot cards or whatever, that there really is a system, and they just...
The instructors on the training course are teaching cold reading while dressing it up as though it was genuine, so they really are charlatans then?
I think so. I think so. It's difficult because cold reading is something that you can be taught to do without it seeming like tricks.
Okay.
I've been in a situation where trainee psychics are sat around saying things to each other like, I'm sensing you're on a bus and the bus is going the wrong way, but it might not be a bus, it might be a relationship. And when you're hearing things like that, you think, well, okay, this isn't cold reading, this is just people sort of apotheosizing intuition and just learning to just, well, I'll just speak openly and I know this other person's going to make it fit because we're all partisan and we're all learning together.
When they're learning it all together, they're still dressing it up in their own minds as the spirit world talking to them, rather
absolutely.
than...
But all it is it's just being intuitive and being open and being, well, just say what you feel. That's all it is. It's this whole thing of intuiting your way to enlightenment and knowledge. That the teachers who are maybe more media savvy, more sort of career psychics and mediums, are very aware of what's going on and very aware of what the tricks are. But it's difficult to tell. But
I've heard it suggested that sometimes these rather lucrative acts that people put on of psychic divination and things often start out as a kind of folie à deux, that somebody and his partner or his father or something kind of manage to convince each other that they can do something that they can't, and they sort of rev each other up, but still kind of half believe in that they really are psychic, because once they had a really good success, which was a genuine accident or something, and so they're encouraged by this folie à deux partnership, and maybe the partner rigs it so that even the performer thinks he's getting hits which he's really not, that kind of thing.
I think there are two common routes. One is the magician getting into the area that I'm into, which is sort of the sort of psychological mentalism, it's called, but then realising that you can step over the line and pretend to be doing it for real, and there's a lot more money in that. So yeah.
So there is more money if you pretend to be something that you're not.
There's the moment you're saying it's real. The moment you say it's real, you're tapping into something enormous in people.
Yes.
The other route is the stage medium. Going back to sort of, Doris Stokes, very famously, is sort of normally from showbiz stock, have normally been taught the skills by people from that world that, just see it as part of performance, as part of showbiz. And again, I think those are skills that are then turned rather ugly, but that's a very common route as well. I think very rarely, I think, is there any real belief in it, other than the fact that if you are spending your life lying to people, how do you deal with that other than rationalise it in your own head after a while and decide, well, I do kind of believe in it, and I do believe that intuition, it may not be psychic, but I do believe that I'm intuitive, and that maybe that does give me an insight and it comforts people, and you start to rationalise it and maybe create a sort of a loose belief around it that follows after the fact. But I think very few people get into it at that level from any kind of sincere beginnings. I know the teacher of one of the very famous modern psychics has absolutely taught them as fraudulent techniques and is upset with him for passing them off as real. I won't say who it is.
They do make a lot more money by pretending to be psychic than they do by frankly admitting that they are conjurers.
Yes, it's a huge racket. And there's a very fine line to be tread. I mean, in my world, I'm sort of, on the one hand, trying to create a magic illusion, on the other hand, wanting to be honest about it as well. And the justification that psychics give is that, well, it comforts people. My feeling on that is, if they're lies, who are you to decide that your lies are what people need to hear to comfort them? And I think it's a twisted logic. If you've lost somebody dear to you, and I'm trampling all over those memories by telling you that they're here now saying this and that, I mean, that's none of my business. And if I'm just doing it because I can earn some money out of it, and when you watch these people at work, so much of it is ego. I mean, some of the mediums at these spiritualists shows, especially the ones that aren't so good, they just look like second-rate stage hypnotists that you might see in a pub or in Corfu or something. It's horrendous, and it's that I find really quite ugly.
Do you think that people are ever actually positively damaged psychologically by attending seances with mediums?
I think there are certainly rare cases, maybe not that rare, of people who get quite addicted to it. You know, if you've lost someone that's very dear to you, it's an ugly situation where if you get addicted to a charlatan or a number of charlatans on stage, if you go to every medium show you can because you want to reconnect with someone you've lost, I think that's damaging. A friend of a woman who'd been to a rally given by Doris Stokes, who was a famous medium a little while ago. And what Stokes' people would do is they'd go to a new town and they'd have any number of letters coming in from people desperately wanting Doris to get in touch with someone they'd lost. So Stokes is turning up with, she's got all the information, she doesn't have to really do any cold reading at all. It's called hot reading. It's known as when you know the information up front. But what they'd also do is they'll go through the papers and find any stories of, accidents or where people have been lost. And this woman got a phone call from Stokes' people saying, Doris has, she's got a message for your son. You've lost a son in an accident, is that right? She said, yes, it had been in the papers. It's quite a well-publicised thing. Well, she'd like to give you a message from your son. So would you come to the rally? And this woman, well, she can't just give me this message on the phone. Well, no, she'd really like you to come to the rally where the spirits are. Okay, so this woman turns up, and they also said to her on the phone, would you wear like a red top or just something so she knows to identify you, so she knows where you are? We've got you a really nice seat near the front. So this woman turned up, a bit sort of bemused by the whole thing, but thinking, okay. And during the show, after Stokes had had a few misses, needed to lift it a bit, she said, oh, there's a lady over there in the red jumper over there, and oh, there's a lovely lad coming through to me now. He said he died and he was your son. It was a drowning, wasn't it? Is that right, my love? Is that right? Yes. She's going, yes. Oh, she stands her up. Yes, that's right. Oh, he's just saying, oh, it was terrible, but he loves you, and you're not to feel bad about it. You're not to blame yourself. And then goes over there. And the audience are amazed, because it looks like she's just been able to... But this woman felt so violated.
I've just remembered a story of James Randi about how he unmasked a psychic who was using he had a earpiece,
right,
and he had somebody talking to him by radio, who was feeding him information that he was getting from the back of the room. And Randi actually got an engineer to intercept the radio frequency. And so he actually had a film which was shown on national television in America of this bogus psychic calling spirits out and saying, I'm getting so-and-so, and getting uncannily accurate information. And all the time, the television audience was hearing the prompting voice that was going into the earpiece. They were hearing it.
I see, right, yeah.
The man should have been completely destroyed. And what happened, he went on with his career as if nothing had happened. It's as though people just don't want to know. They don't want these people to be unmasked, and if they are unmasked, it's almost as though they just go into denial and cut it out. Or maybe there are enough people out there who just hadn't seen that television show and so didn't know that he'd been unmasked. But that particular charlatan, to this day, according to Randi, is doing a brisk trade, despite an unmasking which could not have been more devastating, you would have thought. Michael Shermer, in one of his books, has a story about how I think he was on stage with a medium who was calling up spirits and talking to people about what their dead relatives said. And Shermer unmasked it. He explained on stage about cold reading, told the audience how it was done. And afterwards, several people in the audience came up absolutely furious with him because he had shattered their illusions. Somehow it was thought to be cruel when people were deriving comfort and consolation from being deceived in this way. It was cruel to break that deception.
I've known cases of people that have lost a child that's so dear to them, and they cannot get over the fact they've lost the child, and become addicted to these charlatans, for want of a better word, and that to me is as cruel as it can be. Now, I don't see it as a mission to turn every believer into a non-believer, but I think it's important to get that message out so people can take it on board and understand it and have more information, because if you have more information you can make better decisions.
I'm going to go to a séance where a medium will no doubt call up dead relatives of people in the audience and things. And can you give me some tips to what to look out for?
I think you'll find it probably disappointingly transparent. I think with spiritualist services, a big difference is that the medium doesn't really have to do any work because he's got a whole room of believers. And that's the difference. If you approach any psychic with any sort of scepticism, you'll see through pretty much all of it, unless they happen to get lucky, if you go there as a believer, of course you're going to want to make everything fit. And if you're going to a church service every Tuesday, or I think it's normally Tuesday they do these things on, and you're desperate, maybe this will be the week that the medium will get in touch with Albert or whoever, whoever I've lost. You'll do everything to grab at it. So they don't have to really do a lot of work. And if it's something you also have to be aware of, if it's a group that the medium is familiar with, he'll know a lot of their stories already. And a very common thing with TV psychics is that when the cameras are off, they have a chat with people in the audience and find out who would like someone to come. Anybody else should be looking at.
Transparent as that, is it? I mean, they
transparent
don't even
as that. What they often do is they bring their own clients with them, pick the ones that cry a lot, and bring them along on filming. But very commonly, before filming starts, they come out, have a chat with the audience, because they're all believers. Is there anybody you've lost someone who drowned? And okay, well, if anybody comes through that's drowned, I'll know that'll be for you.
Okay.
The best ones just keep talking. They know the value of just really not stopping and just bulldozing over any response from the audience. The worst ones pause too much. They get in too much discussion. They're found out. It's creating the illusion to the whole room that the medium's hitting one thing after another. Whereas if you really pay attention to what the person's saying, very often you'll just see they look a bit bemused and a bit bewildered. That does tend to happen. Again, depends on the style of the medium. The most common pattern is going to be throwing out a sort of a half statement, getting the name Albert. Does that mean anything? Can anybody find that for me? Albert, someone over here, or is it the lady over there? Then, and then the person in the audience will supply the information back. Yes, that was my husband. Okay. And then you get the medium will add that information. Now she knows it's the husband, whereas it could have been anything. It could have been the name of the person in the audience, Albert. It could have been a friend of yours in the audience. It could have been someone that died. It could have been anything. But now she knows it's the husband. She then feeds that back, or he feeds that back by saying, that's right, it's your husband here, and he's telling me that, you're a lovely wife, and moves on, as if he'd said it was the husband itself, but he hadn't. You get a statement that's made that's vague. I'm seeing something to do with an accident maybe involving water. You go, yes, that's right, when I was young, and he goes, that's right, he's showing me when you were a kid, and he's saying he was, even there, he was there looking after you even when that happened, and you're amazed that he's picked up on this memory. Or you say, yes, that's right, the dead person died because of an accident in water, and then I'll say, yes, that's right, he's telling me that that's how he passed away, that he drowned, and I'll turn whatever you say. So I throw out some words, you give me the meaning, and then I carry on, I reiterate, I feed that back to you as if that's what I intended from the start. Although it's so quick that you really are left with the impression that the medium has all the information and is giving is giving the person in the audience bit after bit, and they're not. He's saying very little and waiting for the feedback and then throwing back. What you'll see is, far from it being all vague or saying things that apply to just everybody, you'll get very specific details being thrown at you. So I'm seeing a pair of cufflinks with a sort of a red jewel or something, something really quite specific, and normally the person doesn't quite make it fit, but then the medium will keep on pushing and start to turn into something else. Well, it's definitely some jewellery, it's definitely showing me jewellery, and then of course they're going to make jewellery fit. Well, yes, it was, I've got some jewellery at home, that's right, he's saying have a look in your jewellery box because there's something there you've forgotten, and the red cufflinks have been forgotten. So keeping track of, well, what was the medium pushing for at the beginning? And one thing I saw was something to do with his dog that used to sleep in the hallway. And the answer sort of came back, sort of, no. Well, it's something in the hall. It could be a picture of a dog in the hallway. And the answer came back, no. I mean, I've just put up another picture. I've put up a picture in the hallway of the family or something. That's it. He's saying he doesn't like the picture in the hallway. The dog was forgotten. But it actually started off talking about a dog.
Yes, yes.
And purely because of what the audience member said, now it's about a picture in the hallway. It's become something completely different. But it looks like the medium is just sort of fumbling.
Yes.
Whereas in fact he's gauging everything on what the person's giving us.
Some people listening will be saying to themselves, oh yes, well I see that, but on the other hand, I was told a story by somebody who was told a story where the medium really did get an exact fit. And I suppose the point there is that stories only get passed on the very rare occasions when they do get an exact hit.
Well, one of the first things you learn as a magician is that you do a trick, but half of the trick happens afterwards when that person remembers it and then wants to tell somebody else in a way that doesn't make him look stupid or look like he's been fooled. So these stories we hear are always deleted and edited and twisted in all sorts of ways. I heard a tale of a psychic who was at a policeman's event. And apparently it was a psychic the police had used, although I think normally it's psychics saying they've helped the police, but either way she was at this event. This was being told to me by a friend of somebody who was there that the psychic spoke to at the end of the evening, and the psychic came up to this guy, who was a policeman, and said, oh, very nice to meet you, and shook his hand. And as she shook his hand, she sort of stumbled back a bit and rolled her eyes back into her head, and said in a sort of far-off voice, "Oh, you better leave. Henrietta's cold. Henrietta's cold. She's waiting for you." And then she snapped out of it and said, "That was who's Henrietta?" And the guy was amazed, because Henrietta was the name of his car. And when he went outside, it was snowing. So Henrietta was gone. Now, this guy tells my friend tells me, with that air of, how do you explain that?
Yes.
But if the woman had gone up to him and merely said, "Well, apparently you call your car Henrietta," which was the only bit of information that was of interest, that was the name of the car. Somebody comes up to you and says that, you just go, "Oh, who told you that?" Obviously, presumably loads of people at the event knew that, he's a policeman, he's called his police car a name, they presumably know that.
Yeah.
So it's not a big deal, the fact that she would know that, or might have found it out. But because of how she presented it, through nothing other than showmanship, it made the difference between a non-event that would be passed over and a massive event for this guy that has presumably changed his belief on a lot of
And he
things.
goes around telling other people.
Goes around telling other people, and
etc., yes. During the making of this programme, I've talked to a number of psychics and palm readers and people like that who've sort of done me. And what slightly disappointed me is that they got spectacularly bad results. I mean, I thought at least they'd be good at it and that they would sort of get a reasonable number of hits. And bearing in mind that what they are is like some kind of conjurer. I mean, if a stage conjurer scored as many misses as these people, he'd be booed off the stage. And yet, because they bill themselves as psychics rather than conjurers, paradoxically, they're given more latitude, they're given more license to fail than if they were taking rabbits out of a hat or sawing women in half or something. Despite
the fact that, extraordinary claims demand extraordinary proof. So you'd imagine that it would be... they'd have a much harder job. Whereas the reality is they have everything stacked in their favour. They tell you that it's not an exact science, that some of this may not work, and all I do is I get a sense of this, and you'll help me make that fit, and if it doesn't work, and they make no promises for a start, which is a very odd thing from the outset. I don't know what they're claiming if they can't make any promises. And if you're not really making them fit, if you're not playing the game, then you're blocking the energy. There was one discussion I had when we filmed something along these lines that we didn't end up using because they were just so terrible. Was a discussion between a guy who was just our control subject, so he was neither being difficult or just being honest, and a psychic who said to him, "Now I'm sensing you either live on your own or you live with other people." And he said his response was, "I don't know, can you be a little bit more specific?" So she reiterated, "Well, it's either on your own or with a group of people." And again he said, "Well, I'm really not sure what you mean, can you be more specific?" At which point the instructor intervened, quite chippily, and said, "Look, you either live on your own with other people, which is it?" And he said, "Well, I don't know, I live with my family, I'm not sure what that means." She said, "Well, then you live with other people, don't block the energy," and was quite livid with him.
One of the psychics that did tarot cards for me, I asked the question, but how do the spirits actually influence the position of the cards? And that was the point where she gave up. It was a different one. She gave up at that point because I was being...
You're blocking the energy,
I was being too inquisitive. I was being too sceptical. And so that brought the thing to a halt.
I had the same thing with a palmist. She started talking about it, and I was trying to be interested, and I sort of was interested. I'd never had it done before, and I said, "So what is the link between your personality and your future and so on? What's the theory behind how that actually gets into the hand?" I thought that would be an interesting answer. Same thing, blocking the energy, end of session.
Yeah.
Just talking about the illogicality behind so many of these systems, and tarot cards, which are obviously very, very popular. The deck is mixed, and you choose a number of cards that's sort of laid out, and then your fortune and fate is read from them. Of course, the interesting conundrum there is that if you did the same thing 5 minutes later, you'd pick out very different cards. So presumably your fate and the reading would be necessarily very different. If it's relying on those cards, 5 minutes later it would be completely different. And when there have been questions about this, the answer is, "Oh, well, that's because your fate changes from minute to minute." But then you have to think, well, so presumably to get a tarot reading, you'd have to constantly be having a tarot reading over and over again in order to know what the accurate situation is, if it constantly changes from minute to minute. If I'm a tarot reader and we shuffle and the 5 cards come out, and those are the 5 cards that dictate your fate, that's great. And if you went away at that point, that's fine. I've told you your fate, and I've told you everything about yourself and your past, present, and future.
But if
you said, "Great, can we just do that one more time?" would you not expect the same cards to come out because it's fixed?
It's a good question.
And if there are other ones, then wouldn't we, you know, but they say, well, it's because your fate constantly changes. Each time you deal the cards out, your fate changes from minute to minute. So the only answer for you is you'd have to consistently go back.
Yes.
When would you stop? When would you have the correct one? I don't understand that at all.
Yes. I did a couple of psychics who are quite famous on television and things, and one after another they gave up. They would, I mean, the first one started talking about my father, and they said, your father in the spirit world is very sorry that he didn't manage to say goodbye properly. So I sort of strung her along for a bit before letting her know that my father is in fact still alive at the age of 91. At that point, she just gave up. She said, sorry, it isn't working, the spirits aren't coming through, I'll just have to stop.
You'd think if it was real, you'd at least be able to sit there quietly and they'd be able to do it without needing any sort of feedback. You'd feel you wouldn't have to play the game as the sitter.
One of the people I went to see was a psychic who asked to have my watch, which he held in his hand to get the spirit vibrations out of the watch, etc. And then he turned up some tarot cards. And then he went through a really rather stunning series of misses. Almost everything that he got wrong. He got some elderly relative beginning with the letter G, something to do with the advertising profession. Total miss. I mean, no suggestion. Then he got an elderly woman beginning with E. Well, that was a sort of hit because my grandmother's name began with E.
That's incredible.
And he and it is the commonest letter in the alphabet.
Yeah.
And he said that she kept lots of cats, and so I was able to tell him that she absolutely hated cats. They were the ones that she abhorred. Yes, yeah. Anyway, it went on, and it was all a total set of failures. And then I was afterwards told at the end that he told somebody else that he'd done really well and that he'd got lots of hits, and I think he believed it.
Maybe I think for him that was a...
Yeah, I mean, it was
the best readings ever.
But I mean, so that there's an element of self-delusion as well as just deluding the punter about this.
The whole skill seems to be not about comforting people. I think that was rubbish, although they say that. It's about getting hits. It's about hearing yes, yes, yes. So it's a strange sort of ego thing.
And getting money for it.
And getting money for it. So, yeah, so I think it's not surprising that sort of self-delusion happens and that people after the event will say, yes, that went extremely well, and shamelessly, you know, publicise themselves as helping the police solving this murder and that murder when they've done nothing other than presumably just rang up and say, do you want any help? No. Unless I aided police. That is self-delusion, but it's self-delusion born out of this sort of, I think, just this sort of ego need that runs behind it.
Do you feel that there's any kind of growth in gullibility and in exploitation of gullibility going on at the moment?
I think the psychic industry has been around for so long. It's by no means is it, you know, a modern phenomenon.
Very big in the 19th century.
Huge in the 19th century, yes. But you know, in its way, always sort of been around. You know, always been around. And the spiritualists of the 19th century that were making tables rise in the air and tambourines bash around in the dark, and now, since infrared photography was invented and they were caught out by photographs in the dark, now they've turned into the modern day spiritualists who just talk, and it's a lot more difficult to disprove. So it's been around for a long time in different guises. But, you know, we live in an age where less people are going to church, and there's a suspicion of science, I think, through the relativist agenda that sort of, that we've been through of all truth is equal, and, you know, nothing's really true, and that my truth is the same as your truth, and it just comes from my culture and my values, and that's all there is. And if you buy into that, then the scientific model is just one model, which is no more or less valid than the New Age model or whatever. And that way of thinking throws all rational discussion out the window and all possibility of, you know, the importance of evidence and the importance of discussing these things as adults out the window. And you're sort of left with a culture where everything's as valid as everything else. So of course that's going to perpetuate an acceptance of alternative medicines, obviously, which are huge now, and belief in these psychics and charlatans, and that industry as well, of people that realise it's a fairly easy job to get up on stage or sit one-on-one with somebody in their front room and charge whatever to trample over your memories of a child that you've just lost. I mean, it's yes. Revolting.
I'm slightly surprised that the academic sort of Sude's cornery of cultural relativism and things, which is big in academic departments in universities, has actually trickled down to that extent into the sort of mass audiences that are fooled by these fakes.
It feels unfashionable to talk to people about the importance of evidence, of testing things, even just in a little way. You know, a friend of mine who's a psychic told me about, she puts crystals in her plants and they grow better. And I said, well, you've got loads of plants. Have you ever put two in the same window and watered them the same? Maybe just put crystals in one and not the other. And I did that, and I don't think that's being, nasty or rude. It's just kind of curiosity, isn't it? And but that was being very.
Did you take offence at that?
A little. I was being Western.
Yes. I mean, I've actually noticed that people have taken offence when I've made the very gentlest and mildest suggestion of something just beginning to approach a sort of test.
But I suppose one person's curiosity is another one's offending somebody else. The trickle-down effect is interesting. I think it's always been there, but I think with the TV as well, it's become a big thing on TV, and with the amount of TV psychics and mediums we've had, that's brought up a whole load of career mediums and psychics that now can easily get a spot on TV, or cheaper to hire or cheaper to go to than the really famous ones, and it's just become an industry that we're more aware of now.
Do you blame television, whatever they call them, commissioning editors and people like that, for pandering to this sort of thing? I mean, going after ratings by giving airtime to what they must know are fakes and charlatans.
It's the same problem with newspapers printing scaremongering stories about MMR vaccine or things that aren't. They're not really giving the facts because sensationalist stuff sells papers, and it's obviously the same with TV. But someone I know spoke to me after a show that I did, and there's a famous TV medium psychic show where a guy goes around and visits haunted places and is able to talk about and channel various spirits that are there. And it's a very entertaining, very, very popular program. And normally they often go to pubs and hotels and places like that that are supposedly haunted. And this one pub had a story of a murder and a ghost that was behind it, and everybody knew it, everyone in the town knew it, it was famous for it. And the film crew came to that town to investigate it and to do a piece on it. The production crew all knew about the story, so for the medium to find out about it was no challenge at all. I mean, the fact that he could come up with the details of a murder and a ghost was no challenge at all, because he would have known that anybody could have told him, because it was general knowledge, popular knowledge in the area. So he goes on the show and he channels these spirits and talks about the murder and comes out with all these details, and it might look impressive if he didn't realise that he had access to that information. But what this person told me, when he spoke to me after the show, was that the pub owner had made up the story about the murder and the ghost just to create a bit of colour around the pub, and so he wasn't impressed at all. And you can't help but think, those people making that show, they know it's rubbish.
They know, yes.
But it's a popular show, so
yes. And they would defend it by saying, oh, it's good for ratings, people enjoy it, don't be so po-faced. Just enjoy it. It's just a laugh. That's what they would say.
Exactly. And then you speak to people, on the other hand, who really, on the basis of programs like that, and and other stuff that happens to them in everyday life, like the phone ringing and someone they've been thinking of, really base their beliefs. They change their life. They live their lives according to these messages that programs like that and things like that give out. So I think there's a responsibility that's ignored, but I don't know how on earth you police that.
I have seen television alleged documentaries in which they're talking about ghost stories, and they'll get somebody to tell a ghost. Everybody's got a ghost story which they heard somebody else tell, which perhaps they believe. But where the television people did something I think really quite wrong was they staged it. So instead of just allowing the person to tell the story,
right,
they actually got actors to create the story, and they didn't claim that it was really they were really filming it. They admitted that it was actors, but nevertheless, the fact that it was, and the fact that they had mist all over the place and a spooky atmosphere, would have given far more vividness. People claiming to meet each other in dreams when they were asleep,
right?
And so the three men went to sleep, having agreed to meet in a certain place, and the television company actually staged a meeting with sort of mist swirling around and things. And then they said, well, of course, this didn't actually happen, but nevertheless,
they put the idea
into your head.
By making it visual, it's much easier to believe in a psychic or a spiritualist, because what they're saying they're doing is quite easy for us to sort of grasp. We can make simple images, vivid images in our minds of what that involves, or what a ghost is, or what a psychic phenomenon is. It's much easier for us to visualise that and see that than the more complicated and interesting reasons behind it. And unavoidably, because who we are as people, and the way we like to form patterns quickly, and we need to in order to move on and have those patterns as part of what we understand about how the world works, we fall for it, and we fall for it because it's easy and appealing. And that's a very difficult thing to get round, because you can explain and you can explain, but those explanations are less appealing to the mind. They don't create vivid, colourful pictures.
The great Carl Sagan was always being approached by people who claimed to have been abducted by aliens. And he made a rather telling point that if he were ever abducted by an alien, he would immediately, since they obviously are brilliant mathematicians and physicists, or they couldn't possibly have got here in their spaceships, he would ask them scientific questions, or he'd ask them, please prove Fermat's last theorem, or the Goldbach conjecture. But not a bit of it. The only thing the aliens ever talk about is things like, we must be good to each other, and things like that, which is totally unoriginal. If you're talking to a dead person via a medium, wouldn't you ask them things like, well, what's it like being dead? Do you eat? Do you sleep? Do you sort of have parties? Do you, what's God like? All those sorts of questions. But it's never that. It's, oh, well, tell him I miss him. The dog misses him. It's always so incredibly banal and unimaginative.
When you listen to the demonstrations in a spiritualist church, it really is just about what they believe they're doing is supplying proof. So they're telling you that, you've got a box of old photographs in a cupboard, and that you have got a scar on your left knee from something when you were young, or that you had this or that accident, and, telling you these things to just sort of constantly supply proof. They never really go anywhere. There's never any sort of real advice involved, which maybe in a way is a saving grace, that, you're not telling people to go away and behave in a certain way. But yes, it is mind-numbingly banal. And also you'd think if they really were able to give all this information, at least be able to sort of say their names clearly, as opposed to just sort of giving letters.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. No, real pleasure. Thank you. Thanks.